When my daughter Jessica called me on that rainy Tuesday evening in March, her voice carried a tone I'd never heard before. Cold, rehearsed, like she was reading from a script. "Mom, we need space," she said without any preamble. "David and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if we moved somewhere fresh, somewhere we can focus on our marriage and the kids without any outside influences." Outside influences? That's what I had become to my own daughter? What she didn't know was that I had just inherited $2.3 million from my late sister Margaret's estate, money that was sitting quietly in my accounts while I decided how to use it. But here's what really happened next, and why sometimes the people who think they know you best are in for the biggest surprises of their lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Patricia Henley, though everyone calls me Patty. I'm 58 years old, and I've lived in the same cozy neighborhood in Burlington, Vermont for the past 32 years. This is where I raised Jessica as a single mother after her father walked out when she was just 3. This is where I built my career as a real estate agent, where I knew every neighbor, every street corner, every story behind every house that had ever been sold. For 3 decades, this place had been my anchor, my identity, my entire world. 6 months ago, my sister Margaret passed away unexpectedly from a stroke. Margaret had been the successful one in our family, the one who moved to Boston and built a consulting empire while I stayed in Vermont, selling houses and raising my daughter. We weren't particularly close, which made it all the more shocking when her lawyer called to inform me that she had left me everything: her penthouse, her investment portfolio, her business assets. After taxes and estate fees, I was looking at $2.3 million, more money than I had ever imagined having. The inheritance came with a strange kind of grief. I mourned Margaret, yes, but I also mourned the relationship we never had, the conversations we never shared, the sisterly bond that had somehow gotten lost in the geography and choices of our adult lives. I kept the money quiet, told no one except my financial advisor. I wasn't ready to deal with how it might change things, how people might see me differently, how my carefully constructed life might shift on its axis. Jessica had always been the center of my universe. After her father left, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked double shifts showing houses on weekends and evenings so I could be there for every school play, every soccer game, every teenage crisis. When she met David in college, I embraced him like the son I never had. When they married 5 years ago, I cried tears of joy watching my little girl in her wedding dress. When they had Emma, now 4, and little Michael, who just turned 2, I thought my heart might burst with happiness at becoming a grandmother. For the past 5 years since their marriage, Jessica and David had lived just 12 minutes away from me in a charming Victorian they'd bought with help from my real estate connections and a small down payment loan I'd provided. 12 minutes door to door. Close enough that I could babysit Emma and Michael whenever they needed date nights. Close enough that Sunday dinners at my house had become a cherished tradition. Close enough that I felt like I was truly part of their growing family. David worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. Steady work, but not particularly lucrative. Jessica had taken a part-time position at a local marketing agency after Emma was born, wanting to balance career and motherhood. They lived comfortably, but carefully, budgeting for groceries and saving for family vacations to the lake each summer. I helped where I could, quietly paying for things like Emma's dance classes and Michael's daycare expenses, always framing it as gifts from a doting grandmother rather than financial necessity. I thought we had a beautiful relationship. I thought I was the kind of mother and grandmother that every family hoped for. Involved but not intrusive, helpful but not overbearing, present but respectful of boundaries. At least, that's what I believed until that phone call in March. Outside influences, Jessica had said, and the phrase kept echoing in my mind as she continued talking. "We've found a great opportunity in Denver. David's been offered a position with a firm there, and we think it's time for a fresh start. The kids will adapt easily at their ages, and honestly, Mom, we need to learn how to be independent, how to make decisions without always having you right there to help or give advice. I sat in my kitchen holding the phone, staring out at the bird feeder had hung just outside the window so Emma could watch the cardinals and blue jays during our breakfast visits. "When are you thinking of making this move?" I managed to ask, though my voice sounded strange and hollow to my own ears. "The house is already put on the market," Jessica said, and I felt like I'd been slapped. "We wanted to make sure everything was set before we talked to you about it. We didn't want to get your hopes up or have you try to talk you out of it if it wasn't going to work out." Get their hopes up. Try to talk them out of it. As if my opinion, my feelings, my role in their lives was something to be managed and controlled rather than considered and respected. "The house is already listed?" I repeated numbly. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. This is a good thing for us. David's new salary will be almost double what he makes here, and Denver has so many opportunities. We'll visit, of course, and you can come see us too. It's not like we're moving to another planet." But it felt like another planet. Denver was 1,200 miles away. Denver was flights and hotels and scheduled visits instead of spontaneous dinners and weekend babysitting. Denver was my grandchildren growing up without me, learning to ride bikes and losing teeth and taking first steps that I would only hear about through phone calls and video chats. "What about Emma's dance classes?" I asked weakly, grasping at any reason that might make them reconsider.
She loves Miss Kelly so much, and she's just starting to really improve with her pirouettes. There are dance studios in Denver, Mom, probably better ones than what we have here. Emma will be fine. Kids are resilient. Kids are resilient. As if my granddaughter was just some adaptable creature rather than a little girl who called me Nana and saved her best hugs for me and insisted I read her 3 stories every night I babysat. As if Michael wouldn't notice that the woman who taught him to say bird and cookie and love you had suddenly vanished from his daily world. The conversation lasted another 20 minutes, but I barely heard the rest of it. Jessica talked about Denver's schools and the mountains and how excited she was for this new adventure. She mentioned that they hoped to close on a house there within the month and would probably be moved by early May. She said she knew I'd understand because I'd always been so supportive of her dreams and ambitions. Supportive! Yes, I had been supportive. I had been supportive when she wanted to change majors 3 times in college. I had been supportive when she and David wanted to get married right after graduation, even though I thought they were too young. I had been supportive when she wanted to quit her full-time job to go part-time after Emma was born, even though I knew it would strain their finances. I had been supportive through every decision, every challenge, every moment when they needed someone in their corner. And now they needed space from that support. They needed distance from the woman who had made their comfortable life possible. After Jessica hung up, I sat in my kitchen for 2 hours, watching the sunset behind the maple trees in my backyard. The same maple trees that Emma loved to rake leaves under every fall. The same backyard where Michael had taken his first wobbly steps just 6 months earlier. The same space that would suddenly become empty of the laughter and chaos and joy that my grandchildren brought to every family gathering. That night, I called my financial advisor, Robert Chen, at home. Robert had been managing my money for 15 years, had helped me save for Jessica's college education and build a modest retirement fund from my real estate commissions. He'd also been instrumental in helping me understand and invest Margaret's inheritance in ways that would provide long-term security and growth. "Robert, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me about whether it's financially feasible," I said without preamble. "If I wanted to buy a house in Denver, Colorado, how quickly could we make that happen?" There was a pause on the line. "Patty, are you thinking of relocating? That's a big decision." "My family is moving there," I said, which was true, even if it wasn't the complete truth. "I want to be closer to my grandchildren." "With your inheritance properly invested, you could certainly afford property in Denver. Depending on what you're looking for, we could probably arrange financing or a cash purchase within 30 to 45 days. Are you thinking of selling your Vermont house? I looked around my kitchen, at the photographs of Emma and Michael on my refrigerator, at the art projects we'd made together scattered across my counter, at the evidence of a life built around family and connection. No, I said slowly. I want to keep this house too. Robert was quiet for a moment. Patty, that's certainly possible with your current financial situation, but can I ask why you'd want to maintain two residences? The costs of insurance, maintenance, property taxes for two homes can add up quickly. Because I'm not sure how long I'll want to stay in Denver, I said, which was at least partially honest. I want to keep my options open. What I didn't tell Robert was that I had no intention of staying in Denver permanently. What I didn't tell him was that Jessica's phone call had awakened something in me that I hadn't felt since her father walked out all those years ago. A determination to fight for what mattered to me. A refusal to be dismissed or discarded by people who should know better. If Jessica and David needed space, I would give them space. But I would give it to them on my terms, not theirs. The next morning, I started researching Denver real estate markets with the same methodical approach I'd used to build my career in Vermont. I knew houses. I understood neighborhoods. I could read between the lines of listing descriptions and property comparisons. Within 3 days, I had identified the area where Jessica and David were looking to buy. A family-friendly suburban development called Meadowbrook Heights, about 20 minutes from David's new office. The houses in Meadowbrook Heights were newer constructions, built in the last 10 to 15 years with the kind of open floor plans and modern amenities that young families loved. Tree-lined streets, good schools, parks within walking distance. The kind of neighborhood that real estate agents like me described as perfect for growing families. The kind of neighborhood where property values were stable and homes didn't stay on the market long. I spent hours on real estate websites, studying every available property, every recent sale, every listing that matched what I knew about Jessica and David's budget and preferences. They'd want something with at least 3 bedrooms, a decent yard for the kids, and a kitchen large enough for family gatherings. They'd probably focus on houses in the $400,000 to $450,000 range, which was what their Vermont house sale plus David's improved salary would comfortably support. By the end of that first week, I had identified 3 specific houses that Jessica and David were most likely to consider. One was a 4-bedroom colonial with a large backyard and updated kitchen. Another was a split level with a finished basement, perfect for a playroom. The third was a ranch-style house with an open floor plan and a 2-car garage. But I wasn't interested in any of those houses. I was interested in the house directly across the street from the colonial. The house that shared a back fence line with the split level.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The house whose kitchen window would look directly into the backyard of the ranch. Jessica called me again 2 weeks after her initial announcement to let me know they'd found the perfect house in Denver. As she described it, I realized it was the colonial with the large backyard, exactly as I had predicted. "It's in this amazing neighborhood called Meadowbrook Heights," she said excitedly. "The schools are fantastic, and there's a park just 3 blocks away where the kids can play. We're going to put in an offer tomorrow." "That sounds wonderful," I said warmly, and I meant it. The house would be perfect for them, and I was genuinely happy that they'd found something that met their needs. "When do you think you'll hear back about the offer?" The seller's agent said they'd probably respond within 48 hours. The market's competitive there, but David's new company is helping with some of the closing costs, so we feel good about our chances. After Jessica hung up, I immediately called the listing agent for the house directly across from the colonial. It was a beautiful 5-bedroom Tudor-style home with mature landscaping and a wraparound porch. It had been on the market for just 3 days, priced at $525,000, which was well within my budget thanks to Margaret's inheritance. "I'd like to make a full-price cash offer," I told the agent, a woman named Sandra Mitchell, who sounded pleasantly surprised to hear from a serious buyer so quickly. "I can close within 3 weeks if the inspection goes well." "That's wonderful. Are you relocating to Denver for work?" "Family reasons," I said, which was perfectly true. "I want to be closer to my grandchildren." Sandra was delighted to work with a cash buyer who could close quickly and with no financing contingencies. We arranged for me to fly out to Denver that weekend to see the house in person and finalize the paperwork. I told Jessica I was taking a small vacation to visit a friend, which wasn't entirely a lie since I had reconnected with my college roommate Sarah, who lived in Boulder, about an hour from Denver. The house was even more perfect than the photos had suggested. From the master bedroom window, I would have a clear view of the Colonial's backyard where Emma and Michael would be playing. From my kitchen window, I could see their front door and driveway. The wraparound porch provided multiple vantage points for observing the neighborhood comings and goings. It was like a surveillance post disguised as a charming family home. More importantly, it was a beautiful house that I genuinely loved. The Tudor architecture reminded me of homes I'd admired in Vermont but could never afford. The kitchen was spacious and bright, perfect for hosting family dinners when Jessica and David inevitably realized they missed our Sunday traditions. There was a guest room for Emma and Michael to stay overnight, and a large basement that could be converted into the kind of playroom that would make my house the favorite gathering spot for neighborhood children. I signed the purchase agreement that Sunday afternoon and flew back to Vermont with a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in weeks. Jessica and David wanted space, but they hadn't specified how much space. They wanted independence, but they hadn't defined what independence meant. They wanted to make decisions without me right there to help or give advice, but they hadn't said I couldn't be right there for other reasons entirely. Jessica called me 3 days later, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mom, we got the house! The sellers accepted our offer and we're going to close in 6 weeks. I can't believe this is really happening." "I'm so happy for you," I said, and I truly was. "Tell me more about the neighborhood. What are the other houses like?" "Oh, it's gorgeous. There are some really beautiful homes on our street. There's this amazing Tudor house directly across from us that looks like something from a fairy tale. I hope we get to meet the people who live there. Emma would love to see the inside of a house like that." "I'm sure you'll get to know all your neighbors," I said with a smile she couldn't see through the phone. "Denver seems like a very friendly place." Over the next month, Jessica and David threw themselves into the logistics of their cross-country move with an efficiency that impressed and wounded me in equal measure. They hired movers, transferred utilities, researched schools, and sold their Vermont house in just 3 weeks to a young couple that reminded me painfully of Jessica and David when they'd first started looking for a home together. I helped where I was asked, which wasn't often. Jessica seemed determined to prove that they could handle everything independently, that they didn't need my advice or assistance or involvement. When I offered to help pack, she said they'd hired professionals. When I suggested I could drive out with them to help with the kids during the long trip, she said they'd already planned to make it an adventure for Emma and Michael, stopping at roadside attractions and breaking up the drive into a multi-day family bonding experience. Everything I had done for years was being replaced by professional services or family-only activities. Every role I had played in their lives was being reassigned or eliminated entirely. The night before they left Vermont, Jessica brought the kids over for what she called a one last dinner at Nana's house. Emma was excited about the move, chattering about her new bedroom and the park where she'd be able to feed ducks. Michael, at 2, didn't understand what was happening, but seemed to sense the change in energy around him and was clingier than usual. After dinner, while David loaded their suitcases into their car, Jessica sat with me on my front porch while Emma and Michael played in the yard one final time. "Mom, I want you to know that this isn't about you," she said quietly. You've been an amazing mother and grandmother. This is about us learning to stand on our own feet. I watched Michael chase a butterfly across the lawn, the same lawn where I'd taught Jessica to do cartwheels when she was Emma's age. I understand, I said, because I did understand, even if I didn't agree with it.
We'll video chat every week, Jessica continued. And you can visit whenever you want. Maybe this fall, when we're settled, you could come for Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving. She was talking about Thanksgiving as if it was a generous invitation rather than a family tradition we'd shared for Emma's entire life. As if I should be grateful for the opportunity to visit my own daughter and grandchildren in their new life. That sounds lovely, I said, because what else could I say? That I had already bought a house across the street from them? That their carefully planned independence was about to be completely undermined by their mother's strategic real estate investment? That they had no idea who they were actually dealing with? They left the next morning at dawn, wanting to get an early start on their drive. I stood in my driveway waving goodbye as their packed SUV disappeared around the corner. Emma's little hand pressed against the back window until they were out of sight. Then I went inside, called my own movers, and started packing for my own relocation to Denver, Colorado. 3 weeks after Jessica and David left Vermont, I was standing in the empty living room of my new Tudor house in Meadowbrook Heights, watching a moving truck unload my carefully selected furniture. I had flown out to Denver twice more since my initial house hunting trip, each time staying at a hotel downtown while I arranged for utilities, internet installation, and the kind of home services that would make my transition seamless. The movers I had hired were professionals who specialized in long-distance relocations. They packed my Vermont house with military precision, wrapping each piece of furniture, each photograph, each memento from Emma and Michael's visits in protective materials that would ensure everything arrived exactly as it had been. I wasn't moving permanently, I kept telling myself. I was simply establishing a second residence to be closer to my family. My financial advisor, Robert, had questioned the wisdom of maintaining 2 fully furnished homes, but the inheritance from Margaret made it not just possible, but comfortable. The monthly expenses for insurance, utilities, and maintenance on both properties would barely make a dent in my investment returns. For the first time in my adult life, I had the luxury of making decisions based on what I wanted, rather than what I could afford. As the movers arranged my Vermont furniture in my Colorado living room, I positioned myself at the front window, where I had a perfect view of the colonial house across the street. Jessica and David had moved in just 5 days earlier, and I had been tracking their activities from my hotel room, using a pair of binoculars I'd purchased at a sporting goods store. I knew they had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I knew the moving truck had taken 6 hours to unload. I knew that Emma had cried the first night because she missed her old bedroom, and I knew that David had made 3 trips to the hardware store on Wednesday to buy supplies for assembling furniture. What they didn't know was that their mother was watching every moment of their carefully orchestrated new beginning. The Tudor house was everything I had hoped it would be. The wraparound porch provided multiple observation points, each offering different angles of Jessica's new home. From the kitchen window, I could see their backyard where Emma's swing set was being installed. From the master bedroom, I had a clear view of their driveway and front door. The living room window looked directly across at their living room window, close enough that I could see the outline of figures moving around inside when the lights were on in the evening. I spent my first week in Colorado establishing routines that would maximize my opportunities to observe my family's new life. I learned that David left for work every morning at exactly 7:30, driving his sensible Honda Civic toward downtown Denver. Jessica took Emma to preschool at 8:15, a cheerful building called Little Sprouts Academy that was just 4 blocks from our neighborhood. She picked Emma up at 3 in the afternoon, often stopping at the playground in Meadowbrook Park on their way home. Michael stayed with Jessica during the day, and I watched them through my kitchen window as they played in the backyard, Jessica pushing him on the small swing that David had hung from their oak tree, both of them laughing in the Colorado sunshine. These moments were simultaneously wonderful and heartbreaking.
Wonderful because my grandchildren looked happy and healthy in their new environment. Heartbreaking because I was watching their lives unfold from a distance instead of participating in them. The neighborhood itself was everything Jessica had described. Tree-lined streets with sidewalks where children rode bicycles and neighbors walked their dogs, well-maintained houses with flower gardens and American flags, the kind of community where people knew each other's names and looked out for each other's children. I could see why Jessica and David had chosen this place to build their independent life. On my 8th day in Colorado, I had my first real interaction with my new neighbor. I was watering the flower boxes on my front porch, an activity that gave me a legitimate reason to be outside and visible, when Jessica emerged from her house with Emma and Michael. Emma was wearing a bright yellow sundress and carrying a small pink backpack, clearly excited about something. Michael was strapped into a stroller, holding a sippy cup and babbling happily. They walked directly toward my house, and for one heart-stopping moment, I thought Jessica had somehow discovered my presence. But they walked past my driveway and continued down the street toward the park, Jessica chatting animatedly with Emma about something I couldn't hear from my position on the porch. As they passed, Emma looked up at my house and waved. It was an automatic gesture, the kind of friendly wave that children give to anyone they encounter. I waved back instinctively, and Emma smiled before skipping ahead to catch up with Jessica. My granddaughter had waved at me, and she had no idea who I was. That afternoon, I decided it was time to begin integrating myself into the neighborhood community. I baked a batch of my famous chocolate chip cookies, the same recipe I had used for Jessica's school bake sales and Emma's preschool events, and prepared to make introductions to my new neighbors. I started with the house directly next to Jessica's, a blue Victorian where a woman named Carol Thompson lived with her husband and teenage son. Carol was exactly the kind of neighbor I had hoped to find, warm, welcoming, and eager to share information about the community. She invited me in for coffee and spent nearly 2 hours filling me in on neighborhood dynamics, school districts, local restaurants, and the informal social networks that kept Meadowbrook Heights functioning as a close-knit community. The young couple across the street just moved in last week, Carol mentioned, as we sat in her kitchen. They have 2 adorable children, a little girl and a toddler. The husband works downtown, and the wife seems lovely, very friendly, always smiling when I see her outside with the kids. That's wonderful, I said, careful to keep my voice neutral. It's so nice when families with children move into the neighborhood.
It brings such life to the community. Absolutely. I'm planning to take them a welcome casserole this weekend. The transition from one state to another can be overwhelming, especially with little ones. I remember when we moved here from Kansas 15 years ago, and the neighbors' kindness made all the difference. I filed this information away carefully. Carol would be taking Jessica a casserole this weekend, which meant Jessica would likely mention her new neighbor, the friendly woman in the Tudor house across the street. I needed to be prepared for that conversation. Over the next few days, I continued my careful integration into the neighborhood's social structure. I introduced myself to the elderly couple who lived 2 houses down, the Martinez family, who had been in Meadowbrook Heights for over 20 years and knew everyone's business. I met Linda Walsh, a divorced mother of 3 who lived at the end of the block, and organized the annual neighborhood block party. I chatted with young professionals, retirees, and families with children, building a network of relationships that would establish me as a legitimate member of the community. Each conversation provided me with more information about Jessica and David's settling-in process. The Martinez family had noticed that the children seemed happy and well-adjusted. Linda had seen Jessica at the grocery store and mentioned that she seemed like a very organized mother. Carol had indeed delivered her casserole and reported that Jessica was delighted to meet a friendly neighbor and had mentioned looking forward to becoming part of the community. But the most valuable intelligence came from unexpected sources. Emma had started playing with the Morrison children who lived 3 houses down from Jessica. Mrs. Morrison, a chatty woman in her 40s, was full of information about the new family's daily routines. "The little girl is just precious," Mrs. Morrison told me when I encountered her at the neighborhood mailbox cluster.
She told my daughter that she misses her Nana, who lives far away in a place with lots of snow. Isn't that sweet? Children have such pure hearts when it comes to family. My throat tightened as I heard this secondhand report of Emma missing me. She was telling other children about her Nana who lived far away. She hadn't forgotten me in the excitement of her new life. The knowledge was both comforting and painful. Confirmation that my presence in her life had mattered, that the space Jessica wanted hadn't erased the bond between grandmother and granddaughter. That is sweet, I managed to say. I hope they'll be able to visit their family soon. Long-distance relationships can be challenging, especially for children. 2 weeks into my Colorado residency, I decided it was time to engineer a more direct encounter. I had been patient, careful, strategic in my observations and neighborhood integration, but I was tired of watching my family's life unfold from across the street. I wanted to see Emma and Michael up close, to hear their voices, to participate in their daily world, even if they didn't know who I was. Saturday morning, I positioned myself in my front garden with pruning shears and a watering can, tending to the flower beds that had been professionally landscaped before my arrival. The previous owners had invested in beautiful perennial gardens that required regular maintenance, giving me a perfect excuse to spend time in my front yard. I wore a wide-brimmed sun hat and gardening gloves, altering my appearance enough that even if Jessica looked closely, she might not immediately recognize me. At precisely 9:15, based on patterns I had observed over the past 2 weeks, Jessica emerged from her house with both children. Saturday mornings meant a trip to the farmer's market in downtown Denver, followed by playground time at Meadowbrook Park. Emma wore her favorite purple dress and light-up sneakers, and Michael was bundled into a stroller with snacks and toys for the outing. As they walked past my house, I straightened up from my flower bed and offered a friendly wave. "Good morning. Beautiful day for a walk." Jessica smiled and waved back. "Good morning. Yes, we're heading to the farmer's market. I love how walkable this neighborhood is." "The farmer's market is wonderful," I replied, moving closer to the edge of my property. "I went last week, and the produce was fantastic. Are you new to the area?" "Yes, we just moved here from Vermont. I'm Jessica, and these are my children, Emma and Michael." I felt a rush of emotion at hearing Jessica introduce herself to me as if we were strangers, as if I hadn't been the one to hold her hand on her first day of school, as if I hadn't been there for every important moment of her life until 3 weeks ago. But I maintained my composure and smiled warmly. "I'm Patricia. I just moved here myself, from back east. It's nice to meet neighbors who appreciate good farmers markets." I crouched down to Emma's eye level. "That's a beautiful purple dress. Purple is my favorite color." "It's my favorite too. Nana bought it for me. She lives far away now, but she sends me packages sometimes." My heart clenched at Emma's innocent reference to me, to the packages I had indeed sent since their move, containing small gifts and books and the kind of grandmother surprises that I hoped would help her remember our connection despite the distance Jessica had created. "Your Nana sounds very special," I said softly, looking directly into Emma's bright eyes, the same blue eyes that Jessica had inherited from me.
She is. She makes the best cookies, and she knows all the best stories, and she lets me help her cook dinner, and she has a bird feeder outside her kitchen window where cardinals come to eat, and she taught me how to whistle like them. Emma's words tumbled out in the enthusiastic rush of a 4-year-old describing something she loves. Jessica laughed, but I caught a flicker of something in her expression. Discomfort, maybe, or guilt. Emma really misses her grandmother. Long-distance relationships are hard for children to understand. "Of course they are," I agreed, standing back up but keeping my attention focused on Emma. "But I'm sure your Nana thinks about you every single day and loves you just as much even though she's not close by." "How do you know?" Emma asked with the direct curiosity of childhood. "Because that's what grandmothers do," I said simply. "We carry our grandchildren in our hearts no matter where we are." Jessica shifted uncomfortably and checked her watch. "We should get going if we want to get to the market before it gets too crowded. It was nice meeting you, Patricia." "Likewise. I hope you'll love the neighborhood as much as I do already." As they continued down the street, I heard Emma asking Jessica questions about what I had said about grandmothers and long-distance relationships. Jessica's responses were muffled by distance, but her body language suggested she was deflecting rather than engaging with Emma's curiosity about why her new neighbor seemed to understand so much about missing Nanas.
That evening, I watched from my living room window as Jessica and David sat on their back patio after the children were in bed, sharing a bottle of wine and talking in low voices. I couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language suggested they were discussing something serious. David gestured toward my house several times, and Jessica shook her head repeatedly. I wondered if they were talking about their encounter with me that morning, if Jessica had mentioned anything about my comments regarding grandmothers and long-distance relationships. The next morning, Sunday, I positioned myself on my front porch with a cup of coffee and the Denver Post, recreating the kind of peaceful morning routine I had enjoyed in Vermont, but adapting it to my new surveillance needs. Sunday mornings in Meadowbrook Heights were quiet and family-focused, with most neighbors sleeping in or attending church services. Jessica's family emerged at 10:30, all dressed in their Sunday best. David wore a navy blue suit, Jessica looked elegant in a floral dress, and Emma wore white tights with patent leather shoes that clicked on the sidewalk. Even Michael was dressed up, in tiny khakis and a button-down shirt that made him look impossibly grown up for a 2-year-old. They were clearly headed to church, something that surprised me, since Jessica hadn't been particularly religious during her childhood or early married years. But relocating to a new community often prompted families to seek out traditional institutions for social connection and stability. I made a mental note to research churches in the Denver area and possibly establish my own worship routine. As they walked past my house, Emma broke away from Jessica's hand and ran up to my front porch steps. "Hi, Patricia. We're going to church. Do you want to come with us?" Jessica hurried after Emma, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Emma, honey, you can't just invite people we barely know to church with us." "But she's nice, and she knows about Nanas." I stood up from my porch chair and smiled at Jessica's obvious discomfort. "That's very sweet of you to invite me, Emma, but I'm sure your parents want to explore your new church just as a family today. Maybe another time." "Patricia's right, sweetheart," Jessica said, taking Emma's hand firmly. "We need to let our neighbors have their own Sunday morning routines." As they continued down the street, I heard Emma asking Jessica why they couldn't invite their neighbor to church if church was where people went to be kind to each other. Jessica's explanation about appropriate boundaries and getting to know people gradually was lost in the distance, but I could see David nodding in agreement with whatever she was saying. That afternoon, I decided to take a more proactive approach to community integration. I drove to the grocery store where I had observed Jessica shopping several times and positioned myself strategically in the produce section, selecting vegetables with the kind of careful consideration that would make me approachable for friendly conversation. I didn't have to wait long. Jessica appeared in the produce section at 2:45, right on schedule based on my previous observations, with both children in tow. Emma was helping select apples while Michael sat in the shopping cart, entertaining himself with a small toy car. "Hello again," I said warmly, as Jessica approached the apple display. "We seem to shop at the same times." Jessica looked genuinely pleased to see me. "Patricia, yes! Sunday afternoon grocery runs are a family tradition. Emma likes to help pick out the fruit for the week." "That's wonderful! Teaching children about fresh food and healthy choices is so important." I turned to Emma. "What kind of apples do you like best?" "The red ones that are sweet. Not the green ones because they're too sour for me, but Nana likes the green ones because she says they're good for baking pies." Again, Emma had brought up her Nana without prompting, and again I saw Jessica's slight flinch at the mention of me. But this time, instead of deflecting, she seemed to make a decision to engage more directly. "Emma's grandmother was very involved in her life before we moved," Jessica said carefully.
The adjustment to being far away has been harder than we expected. That's understandable, I replied, selecting my own apples with deliberate care. Family relationships don't just disappear because of geography, especially for children. Have you been able to stay in touch through video calls or phone conversations? Yes, we talk every week. But it's not the same as being there for bedtime stories and baking cookies and all those little daily moments that matter so much to children. I could hear genuine sadness in Jessica's voice, and for a moment I felt a flicker of guilt about my deceptive presence in her new neighborhood. She was missing me too, missing the relationship we had shared, even if she believed that creating distance was necessary for her family's independence. "Maybe your grandmother could come visit soon," I suggested gently. Seeing familiar family in a new place might help Emma feel more settled. Jessica's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Maybe. We're still getting established here. There's a lot to figure out before we're ready for house guests." House guests. She was talking about me as if I would be a house guest rather than her mother, as if my presence in their home would be a disruption rather than a joy. The casual dismissal in her tone confirmed everything I had suspected about her true feelings regarding my role in their lives. We finished our grocery shopping with polite small talk about Denver's weather and the neighborhood's amenities. As we parted ways in the parking lot, Emma waved enthusiastically and called out, "Bye, Patricia. I hope I see you again soon." "I'm sure you will, sweetheart," I called back. "I'm not going anywhere." That evening, I sat on my back deck with a glass of wine, listening to the sounds of Jessica's family through the thin Colorado air. Emma's bedtime routine involved a lot of negotiation about pajama choices and teeth brushing, punctuated by Michael's protests about being put in his crib. David read stories in a patient voice while Jessica cleaned up the kitchen, their domestic symphony playing out just 50 yards away from where I sat in the darkness. For the first time since arriving in Colorado, I allowed myself to really consider what I was doing. I had bought a house across the street from my daughter because she said she needed space for me. I was watching their daily routines like a private investigator, learning their schedules and preferences and vulnerabilities. I was inserting myself into their neighborhood community under false pretenses, building relationships with their neighbors while concealing my true identity and motivations. By any objective measure, my behavior was inappropriate, possibly obsessive, definitely manipulative. If Jessica discovered what I had done, she would be hurt and angry, and probably feel violated in ways that would damage our relationship permanently. But as I listened to Emma's voice drifting across the yards, asking David to read just one more story about a little girl who missed her grandmother, I knew I wasn't going to stop. Jessica had made her choice when she decided she needed space from me. Now, I was making mine. 3 days later, I engineered the encounter that would change everything. The encounter that changed everything happened on a Thursday morning in early June. I had been living in Meadowbrook Heights for exactly 5 weeks, and my careful observation of Jessica's routines had revealed a pattern that I knew I could exploit. Every Thursday, Jessica took Michael to his toddler music class at the community center, while Emma attended an extended day program at Little Sprouts. This left Jessica alone for exactly 90 minutes between 9:30 and 11, 90 minutes during which she typically ran errands or treated herself to coffee at the small cafe downtown. But this particular Thursday, Michael woke up with a slight fever and runny nose. Nothing serious, but enough to keep him home from music class. I watched from my kitchen window as Jessica made phone calls, presumably canceling their plans and rearranging her morning schedule. At 9:15, instead of loading Michael into his car seat, she settled him on a blanket in their backyard with juice and picture books, clearly planning to let him rest in the fresh air while she tackled household tasks. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. Michael would be occupied, but awake. Jessica would be nearby, but focused on other things. And Emma would be safely at preschool, unable to witness whatever was about to unfold. I had been carrying a small wrapped gift in my purse for weeks, waiting for the right moment to use it. The gift was a wooden puzzle featuring farm animals, exactly the kind of educational toy that 2-year-old Michael would love and that Jessica would approve of for his development. I walked across the street with the puzzle in hand and approached Jessica's backyard gate. She was hanging laundry on a clothesline strung between 2 trees, her back turned toward the house. Michael was indeed resting on his blanket about 15 feet away from her, looking drowsy but alert, holding a sippy cup and turning the pages of a board book about trucks. "Excuse me," I called softly through the gate. "I hope I'm not intruding." Jessica turned around, clearly surprised to see me at her back fence. Oh, hi, Patricia. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I just noticed that your little one might be feeling under the weather today, and I thought he might enjoy this. I held up the wrapped puzzle. It's nothing elaborate, just a small gift from a neighbor. I remember how challenging sick days can be when you're trying to keep toddlers entertained. Jessica walked over to the gate, her expression a mixture of gratitude and confusion. That's incredibly thoughtful of you, but you really didn't need to do that. We barely know each other. Sometimes neighbors become friends quickly, I said with a warm smile, and I have a soft spot for little ones who aren't feeling well. May I give it to him directly?
Jessica hesitated for just a moment before opening the gate. Of course. Michael, come meet our neighbor Patricia. She brought you something special. I walked into Jessica's backyard for the first time since she'd moved to Colorado, onto the grass where my grandson was sitting with his juice and books. The space was larger than it had appeared from my various observation points, with mature oak trees providing shade and a small vegetable garden that Jessica had clearly started since their arrival. Michael looked up at me with the solemn curiosity that toddlers display when meeting new adults. His hair was slightly mussed from his morning rest, and his cheeks were flushed with the mild fever that was keeping him home from music class. He looked so much like Jessica had at that age that it took my breath away. "Hello, Michael," I said gently, crouching down to his level. "I heard you weren't feeling your best today, so I brought you a present to help you feel better." Michael accepted the wrapped puzzle with the grave seriousness of a child who had been taught to say, "Thank you" for gifts. "Thank you," he said in his clear toddler voice, immediately beginning to unwrap the paper with the focused determination that 2-year-olds bring to any task involving removal of barriers. "What do you say we put this puzzle together?" I suggested, settling myself cross-legged on the blanket beside him. "I bet you're very good at puzzles." For the next 20 minutes, I sat in Jessica's backyard putting together a farm animal puzzle with my grandson, while Jessica finished hanging her laundry and tidied up their patio furniture. Michael was indeed excellent at puzzles for his age, and he chattered happily about the different animals as we worked together. "Cow," he said proudly, placing the black and white piece in its correct spot. "Pig." "Sheep." "Horsey." "You're very smart," I told him, meaning every word. "And very good at sharing. I like doing puzzles with you." Jessica finished her tasks and came to sit with us on the blanket, watching Michael demonstrate his puzzle skills for our neighbor. "He loves puzzles," she said fondly. "My mother got him started on them when he was barely walking. She has this theory that they help with spatial reasoning and problem-solving skills." My heart swelled at this reference to my educational influence on Michael's development, even as I maintained my friendly neighbor facade. "Your mother sounds very wise. Early childhood development is so important, and it sounds like she was very involved with the children." "She was," Jessica said, and I heard something wistful in her voice. "Sometimes I think we made a mistake moving so far away from her. She was wonderful with Emma and Michael, and they adored her. But David got this amazing job opportunity, and we thought it was time for us to be more independent as a family." This was the opening I had been waiting for, the moment when Jessica's guard was down and she was reflecting honestly about the costs of their relocation decision. I chose my words carefully, wanting to probe deeper without revealing my true identity. "It must be difficult to balance independence with family connections," I said thoughtfully, "especially when grandparents are so involved with grandchildren. Those relationships are precious for everyone involved." Jessica was quiet for a moment, watching Michael place the final piece of his puzzle with triumphant satisfaction. "My mother would love this," she said softly. Sitting in the backyard on a beautiful morning, watching Michael work on a puzzle, having the time to really focus on him without rushing off to the next activity. She always said that the simple moments were the most important ones. "She sounds like a very special grandmother." "She is." Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper. "I think about her every day, wondering what she's doing, whether she's lonely, whether we hurt her feelings by moving away. But David was right that we needed to learn to stand on our own feet. We were too dependent on her for everything.
childcare and advice and emotional support, it wasn't healthy for any of us. I felt a surge of anger at this casual dismissal of our relationship as unhealthy, but I kept my expression neutral and supportive. What made you feel like the relationship was too dependent? Jessica sighed, settling more comfortably on the blanket as Michael began working the puzzle a second time. She was just always there, you know? Every decision we made, every problem we encountered, she was the first person we called. When Emma had trouble sleeping, Mom came over with solutions. When our car broke down, she arranged for repairs and paid for them before we could even discuss it. When we needed date nights, she was available immediately. It was wonderful, but it also meant we never had to figure anything out for ourselves. That sounds like love and generosity rather than unhealthy dependence. Maybe, but Emma was starting to prefer my mother for bedtime stories and comfort when she was upset. And David felt like we were still children ourselves, always running to grandma instead of handling our own adult responsibilities. The final straw was when Emma got hurt at the playground and called for Nana instead of Mommy. I realized we had created a dynamic where my mother was more important to my children than I was.
This revelation hit me like a physical blow. Emma had preferred me for bedtime stories because I had more patience after a long day. She had called for me when she was hurt because I was often the one who handled scraped knees and bruised feelings during our frequent visits. Jessica had interpreted these natural responses as evidence that I was undermining her role as a mother rather than supporting it. "I'm sure your mother never intended to replace you," I said carefully. "Grandparents love differently than parents, but it's not competitive love. There's room for both relationships in a child's life." "Maybe you're right. But at the time, it felt like she was taking over our lives, making all our decisions easier, but also making us weaker as a family unit." So we decided that some distance would help us remember how to be independent, how to solve our own problems and make our own mistakes. Michael had finished his puzzle for the second time and was now examining each piece individually, holding them up to the sunlight and making happy babbling sounds. I reached over and smoothed his hair, a gesture so natural and automatic that I didn't think about how it might appear to Jessica. "You're very good with children," Jessica observed, watching my interaction with Michael. "Do you have grandchildren of your own?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibilities for truth or continued deception. I could confess everything right now, reveal my identity and explain my presence in her neighborhood. I could continue the charade, invent fictional grandchildren, and maintain my cover story. Or I could find a middle ground that honored both the truth and my strategic position. "I do have grandchildren," I said quietly. "They live far away from me now, and I miss them every day. Being around Michael and Emma reminds me of what I'm missing." Jessica's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry. That must be very difficult. How often do you get to see them?" "Not as often as I'd like. Their parents felt that some distance would be healthier for everyone involved." The parallel between our situations wasn't lost on Jessica, and I saw recognition flicker across her face. That's exactly what we did with my mother. I wonder sometimes if we made the right choice, or if we were just being selfish, prioritizing our independence over family relationships. What do you think now, after living here for a few weeks? Jessica was quiet for a long time, watching Michael stack puzzle pieces into a tower. I think we underestimated how much we would miss her. Not just her help with practical things, but her presence, her wisdom, her way of seeing the world. Emma asks about her every day, and I don't know how to explain why we chose to live so far away from someone we love so much. "Maybe distance doesn't have to be permanent," I suggested gently. "Maybe independence and family connection can coexist if everyone is willing to set appropriate boundaries." "Maybe, but I think I burned some bridges when we left. I wasn't very kind about expressing our need for space, and I haven't done a good job staying in touch since we moved. I'm not sure my mother would be interested in rebuilding our relationship on different terms." This was my moment. the opportunity I had been building toward through 5 weeks of careful observation and strategic neighborhood integration. Jessica was vulnerable, reflective, open to reconsidering the choices that had brought her family to Colorado. She was missing me, regretting the way she had handled our separation, wondering about repair and reconciliation. But before I could respond, Michael knocked over his tower of puzzle pieces and began crying with the sudden intensity that sick toddlers bring to minor frustrations. Jessica immediately shifted into mother mode, scooping him up and soothing him with gentle words and back rubs. "I think someone needs a nap," she said apologetically. "Thank you so much for the puzzle and for spending time with us this morning. It was exactly what Michael needed, and honestly, exactly what I needed too. It's nice to have a friendly neighbor to talk to. I enjoyed it too. Please don't hesitate to ask if you ever need anything. Neighbors should look out for each other." As I walked back across the street to my tutor house, I carried with me the knowledge that Jessica was having second thoughts about the distance she had created between us. She missed me. She regretted the way she had handled our separation, and she was questioning whether independence and family connection were truly incompatible. But I also carried the knowledge that she still didn't know who I was. She had spent 90 minutes sharing her deepest regrets about our relationship with the very person she was regretting losing, and she had no idea that her solution was sitting right there on the blanket with her and Michael. That afternoon, I made a decision that would bring our elaborate charade to its inevitable conclusion. I called Emma's preschool. "Little Sprouts Academy, this is Jennifer speaking." "Hello, Jennifer. My name is Patricia Henley, and I'm calling about Emma Morrison. I'm her grandmother, and I'm planning a surprise visit to Denver. I wanted to coordinate with you about possibly picking her up from school one afternoon as a special treat." "Oh, how wonderful! Emma talks about her Nana all the time. She'll be so excited to see you."
Let me just check our authorization forms to make sure we have you listed as an approved pickup person. There was a pause while Jennifer consulted whatever records the school maintained for Emma's family. I waited, knowing that Jessica would have filled out standard emergency contact forms that included grandparents' information, even if she had never intended for me to actually use that authorization. I see here that we have Patricia Henley listed as Emma's maternal grandmother with pickup authorization. When were you thinking of surprising her? Tomorrow afternoon, if that works with your schedule. I thought I might take her for ice cream and bring her home around dinner time. That sounds lovely. We'll need to see identification when you arrive, just for verification, but everything looks to be in order. Emma is going to be over the moon. After hanging up with the preschool, I sat in my living room looking across the street at Jessica's house, where she was undoubtedly putting Michael down for his afternoon nap and probably reflecting on our morning conversation. Tomorrow, I would pick up Emma from school as her grandmother. Tomorrow, Jessica would discover that her mother had been living across the street for 5 weeks. Tomorrow, our carefully constructed game of hide-and-seek would finally end. I spent that evening preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. I rehearsed explanations and justifications, trying to find words that would help Jessica understand my actions without making them seem manipulative or obsessive. I thought about how she would feel when she realized that every neighborly encounter, every friendly conversation, every moment of connection had been orchestrated by the mother she thought she had left behind in Vermont. The next afternoon, I arrived at Little Sprouts Academy at exactly 3:15. Emma was in the playground behind the school building, playing on the monkey bars with several other children. When she saw me approaching, she stopped mid-swing and stared for a long moment, as if trying to process what she was seeing. "Nana?" she called out uncertainly. "Is that really you?" "It's really me, sweetheart," I said, opening my arms as she ran toward me with a squeal of pure joy. Nana, you're here! You're really here!" Emma crashed into my arms with the full-body enthusiasm of a 4-year-old who had been missing her grandmother desperately. I held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling her solid little body against mine for the first time in almost 2 months. "I missed you so much, Emma. I've been thinking about you every single day." "I missed you too. I told everyone about you, about how you live where it's cold and how you make the best cookies and how you know all the good stories. Are you really here? Are you going to stay? I'm really here, and we're going to spend the whole afternoon together. Would you like to go get ice cream? Emma's teacher, a young woman named Miss Sarah, approached us with a warm smile. You must be the famous Nana we hear about every day. Emma, you didn't tell us your grandmother was coming to visit? I didn't know, Emma said breathlessly. It's a surprise, the best surprise ever. As we walked hand in hand toward my car, Emma chattered nonstop about everything that had happened since they moved to Colorado. Her new preschool, her new bedroom, the park where she could feed ducks, the neighbor kids she was becoming friends with. But woven through all of her excitement about new experiences were constant references to missing me, wishing I could see her new things, wanting to share her adventures with her Nana. Mommy talks about you a lot, Emma confided as I buckled her into the car seat I had installed that morning. She gets sad sometimes when we're doing fun things because she says she wishes you were there to see them too. What else does Mommy say about me? She says she made a mistake and she misses you, but she doesn't know how to fix it. What does that mean, Nana? What kind of mistake? I chose my words carefully, not wanting to influence Emma's understanding of the adult complexities that had brought us to this point. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that seem right at the time, but then they realize those decisions had consequences they didn't expect. Your mommy loves you and Michael very much, and she loves me too, but sometimes love is complicated. Are you going to come live with us now? In our new house? It has a big backyard, and my room has purple walls, and there's a park where we can feed ducks together. We'll have to see what Mommy and Daddy think about that, I said, knowing that the conversation with Jessica was still ahead of us, knowing that the next few hours would determine the future of all our relationships. We spent 2 hours at the ice cream parlor and then at Meadowbrook Park, where Emma showed me all her favorite playground equipment and introduced me to several other children as my Nana, who came all the way from Vermont to see me. The other parents and caregivers we encountered were uniformly charming, welcoming me as a visiting grandmother and commenting on how much Emma obviously adored me. At 5:30, as the sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, I loaded Emma back into my car for the drive home. She had chocolate ice cream on her shirt and grass stains on her knees from playing at the park, and she was carrying a small bouquet of dandelions she had picked for her mother. These are for Mummy, she explained seriously, to make her happy about you being here.
As we turned onto our street, Meadowbrook Heights, I could see Jessica standing in her front yard, clearly watching for our arrival. Even from a distance, I could read the tension in her posture, the way she held herself rigid with arms crossed over her chest. She had discovered my identity, probably when the school called to confirm that Emma had been picked up by her authorized grandmother. She knew that Patricia, the friendly neighbor who had been integrating herself into their community, was actually her mother, who had followed them across the country. I parked in Jessica's driveway and helped Emma out of her car seat. She ran toward Jessica with her bouquet of dandelions, chattering excitedly about ice cream and playground adventures, and how surprised she was to see her Nana at school. Mommy, look who came to visit. Nana picked me up from school, and we got ice cream and went to the park, and I told her all about our new house, and she wants to see my purple bedroom. Jessica accepted the dandelions with a strained smile, but her eyes remained fixed on me as I approached. Hello, Jessica? Mom. Her voice was flat, carefully controlled. I think we need to talk. I think we do. Emma looked back and forth between us, beginning to sense the tension that hung in the air like a thundercloud. Are you mad, Mommy? Why are you mad? Nana came to see us. Isn't that good? It's complicated, sweetheart. Why don't you go inside and tell Daddy about your afternoon with Nana? He's been wondering where you were. Emma hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave us alone when she could sense conflict brewing. Will Nana still be here when I come back? We'll see, Jessica said tightly. Go tell Daddy about your day. After Emma disappeared into the house,
Jessica and I faced each other in the driveway of the home I had been watching from across the street for 5 weeks. The woman I had raised from birth, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, and whose tears I had dried, and whose dreams I had supported through every stage of her life, looked at me with a mixture of hurt and anger and betrayal that cut straight through my heart. "How long?" she asked simply. 5 weeks. I bought the house across the street 3 days after you told me you needed space. Jessica closed her eyes and took a deep breath, as if trying to steady herself against the full implications of what I had just confessed. "The Tudor house? You're the neighbor I've been talking to? Patricia, the friendly woman who knows so much about grandmothers and children and long-distance relationships." "I'm sorry for the deception, Jessica, but I'm not sorry for wanting to be close to my family." "Close to your family? Mom, you followed us across the country and bought a house across the street from us without telling us. You've been watching us, spying on us, inserting yourself into our neighborhood and our lives under false pretenses. This isn't being close to family. This is stalking." The word stalking hit me like a slap, harsh and clinical, and completely at odds with how I viewed my actions. "I was not stalking you. I was trying to maintain a relationship with my daughter and grandchildren after you decided that I was an unhealthy influence on your family. By lying about who you are? By deceiving our neighbors and Emma's school? By manipulating situations so you could spend time with my children without my knowledge or consent? By being available when you realized you made a mistake? You told me this morning that you regretted the way you handled our separation, that you missed me, that you wondered about rebuilding our relationship. Well, here I am, ready to rebuild." Jessica stared at me for a long moment, her expression cycling through emotions I couldn't entirely read. Anger, certainly. Hurt and betrayal, definitely. But also something that might have been relief, or recognition, or the complicated mixture of feelings that comes with confronting a situation that has no clear heroes or villains. You can't just show up and expect everything to go back to the way it was. You can't manipulate your way back into our lives and call it love. I never stopped loving you, Jessica, not for 1 minute. You decided that my love was unhealthy and intrusive, so I found a different way to express it. You wanted space, so I gave you space, while staying close enough to be there if you needed me. But we didn't know you were there. That's the problem, Mom. You were making decisions about our lives without our knowledge or consent. You were violating our boundaries in the most fundamental way possible. Before I could respond, David appeared in the doorway, having obviously heard enough of our conversation to understand what was happening. His expression was grim, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man protecting his family. "Mrs. Henley, I think you need to leave now. Jessica and I need time to process this situation and decide how we want to handle it." "I'm not going anywhere, David. I live here now. Emma is expecting me to see her purple bedroom, and we have plans to feed the ducks at the park tomorrow." "You made those plans under false pretenses," David said firmly. "Emma doesn't understand the situation, and until we figure out what's best for our family, we need you to maintain some distance. What's best for your family is having a grandmother who loves those children more than her own life, and who has been supporting and encouraging and nurturing them since the day they were born. What's best for your family is maintaining connections with people who care about you, not isolating yourselves because you're afraid of interdependence." Jessica stepped between David and me, her voice rising with frustration. "You don't get to decide what's best for our family. That's exactly the problem, Mom. You've always acted like you know better than we do, like your judgment should override our decisions. Moving to Denver was about learning to trust ourselves as parents and as adults, and you followed us here to undermine that growth.
I followed you here because I love you, and I missed you, and I couldn't stand the thought of my grandchildren growing up without knowing their grandmother. I followed you here because family connections matter more than your abstract principles about independence. And what about our abstract principles about honesty, about respect, about the right to make our own decisions without having our mother secretly manipulating the situation? I looked at Jessica, really looked at her, and saw for the first time how much I had hurt her with my deception. Not just hurt, but violated her trust in ways that might be irreparable. In trying to preserve our relationship, I had damaged it, possibly beyond repair. I never meant to hurt you, I said quietly. I just wanted to be part of your lives. Then you should have respected our boundaries and given us time to figure out what we wanted instead of deciding unilaterally that you knew better than we did. Emma appeared in the doorway beside David, her small face confused and concerned. Why is everyone talking so loud? Are you fighting about me? The three adults immediately modulated their voices and body language, all of us conscious that our conflict was affecting the child who had been so happy just moments before. Jessica knelt down to Emma's eye level and spoke with careful gentleness. We're having a grown-up conversation about some complicated things, sweetheart. Nobody's fighting about you. You didn't do anything wrong. Is Nana in trouble? She didn't do anything wrong either. She just wanted to see me and Michael. Over Emma's head, Jessica's eyes met mine, and I saw the pain and confusion there, the struggle between her anger at my deception and her recognition that Emma was genuinely happy to see me, that my presence in her life was a source of joy rather than disruption. Nana isn't in trouble, Jessica said carefully, but she made some choices that Mommy and Daddy need to think about. She's going to go home now, and we'll talk more tomorrow. Will she still live across the street, in the pretty house with the flowers? We don't know yet, Emma. There are things we need to figure out first. As I walked back across the street to my Tudor house, I could feel Jessica's family watching from their doorway. Emma waved, and I waved back, both of us uncertain about what would happen next. The confrontation I had been dreading and anticipating had finally occurred, and the outcome was exactly as ambiguous and painful as I had feared it would be. That night, I sat on my wraparound porch, watching the lights in Jessica's house, seeing the shapes of my family moving around inside, living their lives just 50 yards away from me, but feeling more distant than they had when we were separated by 1,200 miles. The deception was over, but the resolution was far from clear. The next morning brought a knock on my front door at exactly 8 o'clock. I opened it to find Jessica standing on my porch, her expression calm but determined. She was holding a cup of coffee from the local cafe, and she looked like she hadn't slept much the night before. We need to talk, she said simply. Really talk, without the children around and without David trying to protect everyone from uncomfortable conversations. I invited her into my living room, the same space where I had been watching her family's daily routines unfold across the street. She settled into one of my armchairs and looked around at the familiar furniture from my Vermont house, now arranged in this Colorado setting. It's surreal, she said quietly, seeing your furniture, your photographs, your books in this place. It's like our old life followed us here, but everything is distorted and wrong. I can understand why you feel that way. Jessica was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but tired. I need you to help me understand why you thought this was the right thing to do.
Not the surface reasons about missing us and wanting to be close. The real reasons. The emotional logic that made following your daughter across the country and deceiving her for weeks seem like an act of love rather than an act of control. It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. I thought about all the justifications I had constructed over the past 5 weeks, all the ways I had rationalized my behavior as protective and caring, rather than invasive and manipulative. I think I was terrified, I said finally. Terrified that if I let you go completely, if I respected your boundaries and gave you the space you asked for, you would realize that your life was better without me in it.
terrified that Emma and Michael would forget me, would grow up thinking of me as a distant relative rather than as someone who loved them desperately. Terrified that all the ways I had tried to support and help your family over the years would be forgotten or dismissed as interference rather than recognized as love. Jessica nodded slowly, as if my answer had confirmed something she already suspected. So you decided to prove that we needed you by making sure you were still indispensable, still present, still involved in our lives, whether we wanted you to be or not. I decided to be available when you realized you had made a mistake. But Mom, don't you see the problem with that logic? You predetermined that we had made a mistake instead of giving us the chance to discover that for ourselves. You didn't trust us to figure out what we wanted and needed. You took that choice away from us. I sat with her words for a moment, recognizing the truth in them, even as I struggled against the implications. Maybe I didn't trust you to make the choice I wanted you to make. That's exactly right. And that's exactly why we needed space in the first place, because somewhere along the way, our relationship became about what you needed from us instead of being mutual and balanced. We talked for 3 hours that morning, the kind of deep, difficult conversation that had been impossible when I was the helpful grandmother and she was the grateful daughter. Jessica told me about feeling suffocated by my constant availability, about never having the chance to fail or struggle or figure things out independently because I was always there with solutions and resources. She told me about David's growing resentment of my role in their marriage, about feeling like they were still children being taken care of by a parent rather than adults managing their own family. I told her about the loneliness of widowhood, about how supporting her family had given my life purpose and meaning after Harold died. I told her about the fear that had driven me to Colorado, the terror that I was losing the most important relationships in my life and wouldn't be able to get them back. The thing is, Mom, I did miss you. I do miss you. And you were right that we made some mistakes in how we handled the separation. But your response to those mistakes was to take away our agency, our right to choose how to repair things, our opportunity to come to you when we were ready. What happens now? I asked, because that was the question that had been hanging between us all morning. Jessica was quiet for a long time, staring out my living room window at her house across the street. I don't know, she said finally. I love you, and the children love you, and I can see that you moved here because you love us. But I also feel violated and manipulated, and I don't know how to trust you after this. What would help you trust me again? Honesty, respect for our boundaries, recognition that David and I are adults who get to make decisions about our own lives, even if you don't agree with those decisions, and maybe some space to figure out what kind of relationship we want to have going forward. How much space? I don't know yet. But probably not the kind of space where you live across the street watching our every move. Over the following weeks, Jessica and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship on new terms. I agreed to sell the Tudor house and return to Vermont, but not immediately. Instead, I rented a small apartment across town, close enough to maintain regular contact, but far enough away to give Jessica's family the privacy they needed. Emma and Michael visit me at my apartment twice a week, and we're slowly rebuilding the grandmother-grandchild relationships that had been disrupted by geography and adult conflicts. Jessica and I talk on the phone regularly, but our conversations are different now, more honest and less automatic. David has been slower to warm up to me again, but he seems to appreciate that I'm making genuine efforts to respect their autonomy as a family. I still don't know if my actions in Colorado were justified or if there was a better way to handle Jessica's request for space. I do know that following them across the country forced all of us to confront issues in our relationships that had been building for years. Sometimes the biggest disruptions lead to the most honest conversations, and sometimes you have to break something before you can rebuild it stronger. 6 months later, Jessica called me in Vermont to tell me that they were planning to visit for Christmas, bringing Emma and Michael back to the place where they had spent the first years of their lives. It wouldn't be the same as it was before, but maybe it would be something better, something more honest, more respectful, more sustainable. Sometimes the space people ask for isn't about rejection. Sometimes it's about love learning new ways to express itself. And sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the freedom to choose you rather than feel obligated to accept you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.